Hi, Christy Solomon here. Thank you so much for tuning into our Christian Concepts channel where we study the Sunday school lesson each week in the Old and New Testament. Today's lesson deals with the prophet of courage. It is identifying the prophet Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 18, starting with verse 5 through 18, is the particular scriptures of our focus today. Of course, you should go back and read 1 Kings chapter 18, starting at verse 5, and even go back to 1 Kings chapter 17, because Elijah is called the prophet of courage in these passages. There are three lesson aims that you should be able to understand and reach as you study 1 Kings chapter 18. 1, you should be able to see what happened during the meetings between the prophet Elijah and the official servant of Obadiah. 2, you should be able to see what happened between Elijah and King Ahab. 3, you should be able to explain the purpose of Prophet Elijah's ministry when he is confronted by the righteous Obadiah and the wicked King Ahab. Here is a lesson outline of our study today, which can be reviewed in 3 sections. Section 1 can be focused on King Ahab and his palace official Obadiah, covering verses 5 and 6. Verse 5, they are surviving the famine that had happened, and verse 6, they are surveying the land. Section 2 focuses on Prophet Elijah and the palace official of King Ahab, Obadiah. That's covering verses 7 through 15. Verse 7, there is this unexpected meeting between Prophet Elijah and Obadiah. And in verses 8 through 14, there is this unwelcome order that Prophet Elijah gives to the palace official Obadiah. And then verse 15 results in Prophet Elijah making the promise to this man Obadiah. And section 3 of our lesson is focusing on Prophet Elijah and King Ahab himself, verses 16 through 18. Verse 16 and 17, there is this antagonistic reception between the two. And then verse 18, Prophet Elijah responds with an honest answer back to King Ahab. So let me read our scriptures in this lesson, chapter 18, 1 Kings, starting at verse 5 and going on through verse 18. I am going to be reading from the New International Version of our Bible. Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals." So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." "What have I done wrong?" asked Obadiah, "that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here? I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here? He will kill me. Elijah said, As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, Is that you, you troubler of Israel? Verse 18. I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your family, father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. The reading of the word of this lesson, 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 5 through 18. In our lesson, we notice that we are introduced to Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17. And when you go back to chapter 17, the Bible shares what we have learned about him through the experiences and what happens with him in those areas. Now, there's not much known about Prophet Elijah except how he comes on the scene directed by God to be interactive with King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, and what follows subsequently from those interactions and in his travel. What you see on the screen are areas that are found in the Bible that share something miraculous happening from God through this prophet, and I want you to go back and read about them again so it can stick into your spirit why we may call him the prophet of courage. Again, we don't know much about Prophet Elijah, but we're going to go to the scriptures and be able to gain some insight into his biblical biography. So I'm going to read some scriptures there. I'm going to give you scripture references where you can go and search to see how we identify Elijah to have this impact in our biblical history. And you'll see that on the screen as well. First, and I think I'm going to mention 7 aspects here. First, he is considered one of God's most inspired prophets, and he was ready to obey and trust God. So why don't you look at and take note that references 1 Kings again, chapter 17, verse 1. That's how we first meet him. It goes and continues to share that in his trusting in God in chapter 21, verse 9 through 24. Yeah. The second point of his biography, we can find that he was and is considered a mighty intercessor as he prayed with faith and great intensity. Well, you see that as we find that he has encountered the prophets of Baal, and that is found in 1 Kings chapter 17 and verse 20 and verse 22. The third point of his biblical biography is mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 18, and that indicates that he demonstrated fearlessness and bold intention to be a reformer for God and to have the people know that only God should be worshiped. And we see that in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 17 to 46, a little past our study today. But number 4, we read that he is considered a performer of miracles. And you see one of them mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 8. Number 5, Elijah is also considered one of the prophets who rebuked the evil actions of those kings. And you can see that again in 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 20. And then that addresses King Ahab. And then later on, you see that that also addresses his son. So number 6, part of Elijah's biblical profile, we can read that he made a heavenly transition. Yeah, that didn't happen every day in the Bible, and we don't read much about that happening today. But at the end of his life, his transition was a straight up bring up into heaven, and that's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. As I said, he started off, we learned a little bit about him in 1 Kings, but then we move on to 2 Kings, and there includes the entrance of Elisha, who was one of Elijah's students. And then number 7, we've learned that Elijah was divinely honored as a prophet. They remember him because in the New Testament, you always hear some of the people are asking, are you Elijah? And if you remember the name Elijah, the spelling in Hebrew, part of that with the EL part is a reference to God. God's presence, God is there. That's why people are asking, are you that Messiah where we have been reading? And so he was divinely honored as a prophet, and we find that in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. Go back over these 7 biblical biographical inserts into who Elijah is and how God used him, and why we now can include him as one of those prophets of courage to go forward in his assignment. And we do know that all of the things that God has us to do does not give us proper preparation all the time, but it certainly gives us his promise that it will be there for him. And so that's what we read about Prophet Elijah. Thank you so much for studying with us. It is always a pleasure to learn about God's men and women and a little more about their personalities, the profile that is given to us in the Bible. What made God choose them, and how did they impact our biblical study today? Till we see you again, Christy Solomon, Christian Concept. You stay safe.